Speaking with the legend himself, and I have to throw that out there because it's second Christmas, always in early July with Phil Steele and his annual preview magazine. So Phil, thank you again for joining us again this year. I know people are flocking to Barnes and Noble and online, but I'm sure there's other locations as well to get your magazine. Where else can they purchase it from?
Yeah, we've got two brick and mortar stores are Barnes and Noble and Books a Million. Those are the ones that are selling the magazine exclusively this year. So if you're out driving around looking for it, 352 pages, like getting 130 different media guides rolled into one. Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, and then if you don't find it or you don't have one of those in your area, go to philsteele.com. When you go to philsteele.com, just click on the store and you can order the magazine there. We ship it out 2-day FedEx, so you'll have it in your hands in a couple of days. So Barnes & Noble, Books a Million, and philsteele.com.
All right, I want to start backwards and test your memory banks. Can you talk about your origin story of how this all began and what got you into this?
Yeah, absolutely. I was writing a football newsletter, and what I would do is every year I would go out and purchase all the different football magazines that were out there, and they just never had enough information in there for me. So I started to compile the information myself, and then somebody came to my office one day and said, "Phil, why don't you turn that stuff into a magazine?" So I thought, well, we'll give it a shot. So what we did with back in 1995, got a hold of Joe DePoplo from Game Plan, and he said he could get the preview magazine on the market for me. It was black and white in newsprint and only 192 pages that first year, and put it on the newsstand. And basically, it has the same layout. Had the same layout back in 1995 that it does today. All the information in the same spot every page. We only covered 88 teams though back then. We didn't even cover all the MAC or the Sun Belt, but we put that first one out. I think it was $6.95 way back when, and ever since then, every time somebody's got a hold of one of the magazines, they can't be without it the next year. So the subscriptions have gone up and up every single year.
Well, I know I joined your clan following, if you will, when you put this kid by the name of Peyton Manning on the cover, roughly around 1997 was my first year of purchase. Do you remember who was on your original cover?
We had 9 players on it. I'll
Oh,
throw
wow.
some names out that I remember. Ron Powlus of Notre Dame, Lawrence Phillips of Nebraska, Danny Cannell of Florida State. You may have heard of him.
Oh, yeah.
Steve Tannehill of South Carolina, Eddie George of Ohio State. Those are the ones that I can remember off the top of my head.
That's awesome. Is there something that's, quote unquote, your favorite part that you like to do throughout? I mean, you mentioned last year this is like an 8 or 9 month process for you. What's your favorite part of this whole process?
I would definitely say my favorite part of the magazine process is talking to the coaches, because when I talk to the coaches, I'm not getting coach speak. It's all off the record stuff. And to have the access to, this year I talked to about a little over 110 of the 130 head coaches. The conversations generally last about an hour, hour and a half. And that's the only non-deadline time I have. What I do is I send them my team pages, which have all the players of their team on there. It's got all my notes on every single player, all the stats on every single player. And I say, okay, coach, put them in order for me and tell me a little something about each of your players this year. That's why the conversations take so long. All the rest of the magazine stuff is done strictly on a deadline. Have to get this done every 15 minutes. Have to get it done every 30 minutes. There's 130 teams each time, so it's a long, tedious process. But definitely the favorite part of it is talking to the coaches.
Let's get into this year's. And Phil, I don't want to call you out, but I want to challenge you on a statement as quote unquote most surprised team. Washington last year technically won the Pac-12 North, but then had a step down. You have them as your number one most surprised team. How do you find most surprised?
Yeah, the way I do my surprise team list is it has to be a non-top 10 team that I think can contend for a playoff spot. Now, what I do every year in February at philsteele.com is I project the AP top 10 for the year. And in those projections, we've done pretty well. I believe we've done it for 11 years. So that's 110 times 11 is 110 teams have been projected to make the AP top 10 at the start of the year. I think we've missed 4. So pretty much I know what the top 10 is going to be at the start of the year, and that's where the list starts. Then I take a look at all those teams rated lower than number 10 and say, okay, which ones have a shot at making the playoff? And we've had a pretty good track record. You go back to 2016, we had the Washington Huskies, and Washington actually made the playoff that year. So it was perfect, a non-top 10 team making a playoff, and we had it number 1 on the list. Same thing in 2018. We had Notre Dame as the surprise team. They were not ranked in the start of the year, but they made the playoff that year, so it was pretty good there. 2019, we had Utah. Utah gets to the Pac-12 title game. If they won that game against Oregon, they would have been in the playoff, but they came up short. And then last year, we came up inches short. We had Texas A&M, a team coming off a 5-loss season, as my number 1 surprise team. There was Selection Sunday, Ohio State, Texas A&M, Ohio State, and the Buckeyes made it. So Texas A&M just missed out. So a pretty good track record. And this year we've got the team that I have, number 1 surprise team, is a big-time surprise. It's the Washington Huskies. They're a team that will not even be favored in their own division this year. But what I like about them is twofold. Number 1, they've got an outstanding offensive line and big. They average about 330 pounds per man. Great set of running backs behind them, very deep, solid tight ends, veteran quarterback. And Jimmy Lake's running the defense, or is the head coach, and he's been running the defense for years. The last 2 years, they've had just 2 and 6 returning starters on defense. This year, they have 8, and I think they're top notch. Then the schedule. They avoid Utah and USC coming out of the South, and they host their 2 toughest opponents, Arizona State and Oregon. And I feel this year that the home field edge will actually be amplified because of the fact fans were not allowed to attend games last year. I think when they get to games, they're going to be even more juiced up. So I think that Washington home field edge will get them past Oregon and Arizona State, and I've actually got them favored in all 12 games.
You used the phrase "juiced up" in a college stadium. Gee, I wonder what you're referring to. Anyway.
And that's why night games, generally, the fans are a little louder.
Yes, exactly. You know these teams arguably better than anybody else. You know their good sides and you know their deep, dark secrets. I go through and I do a lot of research, but my research can't compare to yours. The 2 conferences that I'm most impressed with this year going into the season are the American Conference and the Big 12 overall for the number of teams that I think have quote-unquote stepped up. Is there a conference or a school besides Washington that you feel overall has stepped up, so to say?
Yeah, I agree with you, Charlie, on both the American and the Big 12. I think in the Big 12, you've got Kansas, which is not going to make a bowl game, but all the other 9 teams in the Big 12, I would list as candidates for bowl games. So I like the depth when 90% of your teams are capable of getting to a bowl game. The one conference I would bring up that you didn't mention would be the Sun Belt Conference. And for years in the magazine, I've always rated the Sun Belt basically the 10th of the 10 conferences. But an amazing year last year for the Sun Belt. And the fact that Louisiana knocks off Iowa State on the road. In fact, they went 3-0 against the Big 12 that opening weekend. And it didn't stop. App State, which has been the perennial champ in the conference the last couple of years, didn't even make the Sun Belt title game despite going 9-3. Coastal Carolina went 11-1 on the season, and they were actually 11-0 before getting knocked off by Liberty, and they finished number 14 in the final polls. And then Louisiana, which is mentioned, beat Iowa State early on in the year, finished number 15 in the final polls. So that's some great talent there for the 3 best teams. And then I even like the other 3 teams coming out of the East in Georgia State, Troy, and Georgia Southern. I think all 3 of those are bowl caliber.
All right, well, let's stay in the G5 area because I've got a list of schools and only one of them is going to make the New Year's Six. I really like Cincinnati, but you know their schedule. That unfortunately might do them in, even though they have the strongest of the schedules. The 3 Sun Belt schools you just spoke of, Nevada, possibly Boise, possibly UCF, and then I'll throw this in that you just mentioned, Liberty as well. Is there a team right now that you say is the front runner for the G6 schools or G5 schools to make the New Year's Six?
Yeah, and in that one, I am going to go with Cincinnati. And in fact, I think if any team during the era of the 14 playoff, which let's face it, it's probably going to end in 2022 will be the last year for the 14 playoff. If any group of five team makes the playoff in that entire span, I think Cincinnati this year has the best chance. And here's why. You take a look at the four teams that made the playoff last year. Everybody this year is experienced. Everybody has 15, 16, 17 returning starters coming back. But the four teams that made the playoff last year are all rather inexperienced, 9, 10, 11 returning starters, and all of them lost their starting quarterback. So I think that there's a spot where maybe this is the year that the rest of the NCAA catches up to the big boys. If that happens and they lose a game or two, then you look at Cincinnati, and Cincinnati's a team that I think will be in the AP top 10 at the start of the year. They finished number 8 last year, gave Georgia a great game in the Peach Bowl. They only lost by 3 points in a game they led almost start to finish. They've got 14 returning starters, including their quarterback, Desmond Ritter, back. And you touched on those 2 games. They play Indiana on the road week 3, and Indiana will be a ranked team. Now, if Cincinnati enters the season ranked and knocks off Indiana, all of a sudden maybe they go 10 up to 8. 2 weeks later, off a bye, they play Notre Dame. And if they knock off Notre Dame, which will probably be in the top 10 when they play them, now all of a sudden Cincinnati's even higher, and if they get a couple of losses from the others, they'll keep moving up. So I think the Bearcats have the talent and have the schedule. If they can get those 2 upsets early on in the season, and they be mild upsets, I only think they'll be like a 3 or 4 point dog in those games, then they actually have a shot at making the playoff this year. So I'm going with Cincinnati as my top team in the group of 5.
I thought Spencer Rattler's coming out party was the 4 overtime win against Texas in the Red River rivalry. I'm assuming he's the front runner for the Heisman. Who would you have as your, before the season even starts, first candidate as the front runner?
Yeah, I think you have to go with Spencer Rattler, and I think he hit it right on the head in that Texas game in the second quarter. He gets benched. And some quarterbacks in this era would, say, oh, that's it, I'm transferring, I'm leaving. He was still focused on the game. When he got put back in the game, I thought Spencer Rattler was a better quarterback in the second half, in overtime, and the rest of the season, for that matter. Whenever Lincoln Riley's had an experienced quarterback, it's happened 3 times. His team has made the playoff all 3 times. He's got 2 Heisman winners and a Heisman finalist. So you add it all up. I think with an experienced quarterback now, and the way Spencer Rattler improved as the season went on last year, plus he's got my number 1 rated offensive line in front of him. He's got my number 2 set of receivers in the country, a solid backfield as well. I do think he is the favorite to win the Heisman.
So we're going to go ahead and put them in the box. If you had to choose 3 other schools, Bill, I'm going to put you on the spot. Who would you assume could be the 3 schools rounding out the quote-unquote Final 4?
Well, I really took a big risk in the magazine, Charlie. I picked Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. How's that for being a risk taker this year? So those are my 4 playoff teams. But I think Texas A&M, Georgia, Iowa State are all teams that definitely have a shot at perhaps breaking in there.
You have a service that you provide people to ramp up and get us ready for the season. Once again, Phil, you can get your magazine from Barnes & Noble and Books A Million or philsteele.com. Phil, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Thank you again.
Hey, Charlie, always a lot of fun talking with you. Enjoy chatting.